This week on DWF News.
So, what we did this week is we took a look at the Paris Peace Forum. In November, representatives from all around the world participated in the Paris Peace Forum. There, they discussed issues involving climate change, nuclear weapons, multilateralism in the 21st century, and also the global economic crisis we're having currently. We had someone go out there to represent our organization and talk a little bit about Democratic World Federalism. So in this interview, you'll hear from Roger Kotila, the president of the DWF. So let's just get right into it. Just tell us a little bit how things went out there in Paris. How was the event? What did you really collect from it? And how do you think what happened out there at the Paris Peace Forum really connected with what we do here at the Democratic World Federalists?
Well, the fact that Democratic World Federalists had a representative in Paris, I think, was a very big deal. And we can thank the Global Challenges Foundation, which a Swedish billionaire started a few years ago, that funded this, and the Center for UN Constitutional Research based in Brussels. They are the ones that won a grant from the foundation to go to Paris. Now, I was selected, had the honor of being selected as the representative from the United States. We formed a 8-person team to go to Paris, to this Paris Peace Forum. And the team had representatives that altogether spoke 17 languages. I only spoke one, English. We had a young woman from China, a seasoned UN diplomat, retired diplomat from Japan, a seasoned activist from Africa, and a couple of people from the European Union. So it was a brain trust team. Most of the people were either international lawyers or PhDs in international affairs, and I was the only psychologist.
This week on DWF News.
While out in Paris, Roger had a chance to talk a little bit about the San Francisco Promise, the DWF's commitment to reforming the United Nations through UN Charter Review. If you had a chance, you probably went to our website and you could have went to the link and went to our webpage and learned all the information you need to know about the San Francisco Promise.
So the purpose of the trip was what the theme line was, the San Francisco Promise. And that's the theme line and the theme that the foundation funded. It was a theme that we cooked up right here in San Francisco, meeting with Dr. Shahryar, who's the director of the Center for UN Constitutional Research. And the idea of the San Francisco Promise has to do with the United Nations Charter. We take the position that the Charter is designed incorrectly, that it's deficient, and that's why the United Nations has been unable to end wars. Instead of ending wars, we've had war after war after war. Has been unable to eliminate nuclear weapons, has been unable to eliminate poverty in the world, and has been unable to effectively deal with climate change. So our idea was that the Charter itself needs to be fixed or replaced so that the United Nations can be effective. The UN Charter itself was originally signed in San Francisco. Now, the name San Francisco Promise came from the fact that when they signed the Charter, a lot of the nations that signed on to it knew that the Charter was rigged in favor of the, what I call the bully nations. The Security Council Permanent 5 These nations have a veto. So nothing can go through the United Nations that the Security Council doesn't approve of. So 5 countries control what happens at the global level. Well, on one level, there were people that thought it was impossible, that the Security Council can't be changed, that veto will last forever. Part of the importance of the legal research that the CUNCR, this is the Brussels think tank, has done, is to find a legal loophole in the charter itself that can open the door to a charter review. Once a charter review happens, then the veto may not come into play so much. But there were a lot of people there that thought that the charter just can't be changed. On the other hand, like there was a group next to us from Mexico, and they were calling they were calling actually to eliminate the Security Council and instead form a world parliament at the UN, a democratically elected world parliament. This is something that we as World Federalists support because the UN is not democratic. Only 5 nations have a say, and we believe that the world would be better run if there were democratically elected representatives representing we the people. Right now, we don't have a say in global affairs. We don't have a say with all these nuclear weapons. You know, they've started a nuclear arms race, the United States, Russia, and the United States has plans for nuclear arms for the next 30 years. This is unacceptable. But as it stands now, the UN cannot stop this arms race, and they can't stop these wars.
This week on DWF News.
Could I ask you another question? So you touched on a little bit about militarism, nuclear weapons, climate change, let's say corruption, things like that on a nation-state level. What did you hear about that at the Paris Peace Forum?
Well, I circulated a lot to different groups that were there, and whenever I talked about the fact that at the global level, there's no sheriff in town. In other words, world crimes are committed by the leaders of what I call bully nations. These are the powerful nations. And they invade countries, commit assassinations, kidnappings, false flag operations. And the amazing thing is that no one ever goes to jail, even though these are world crimes. So when I talk to people and talk about the Democratic World Federalists call to have the charter have within it a world judiciary system, one that can be effective, one that has enforcement, and one that applies to everyone. So no one is above the law. That got a great response. And almost everybody I talked to understood right away what that meant. Now, one other thing to this. Right now, we have no control over the multinational corporations. And under our kind of proposals, with the new United Nations, with an improved, better charter, that would give us control over these multinational corporations and international bankers, who right now just do their own thing, whether or not it's good for we the people. And there was a lot of positive response to those ideas. Well, there's 2 aspects to this. In part, I was encouraged with our ideas of a new United Nations with a new world charter, one that was effective. On the other hand, there were other World Federalist groups there that were sticking to the old paradigm, and this disappointed me. And what I mean by that is they were not proposing changes to the UN Charter, which we as Democratic World Federalists consider critical. Rather, they were sticking with the old ways of treaties, international agreements, and the problem with international agreements and treaties is that they're like being built on quicksand. The nations break these treaties anytime they feel it's not in their self-interest. So there's no stability. And yet, to my disappointment, there are groups right now, World Federalists, that are pushing ideas that really won't change the global geopolitical situation. It's more like cosmetic changes. One example would be a group that wants to make the Security Council bigger, but not take away the veto. And this is unacceptable because that's not democratic and it hasn't worked. So that's kind of a summary. Overall, I was excited that the French government in part supported this, and there were some corporations like Facebook that were there and other corporations. So people are starting to come together with this idea of world peace.
This week on DWF News.
So in October, we had a chance to meet with some junior level representatives of ASEAN. That's the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, where we discussed a lot of issues.
Well, what really struck me with this meeting was that the United States State Department invited us to meet with these representatives, these young developing leaders from Southeast Asian countries. Because Democratic World Federalists, we're anti-war, and our program is for world peace. And the history of the U.S. State Department, frankly, has been to support Americans' foreign policy, which has been for war after war. I hate to be that blunt. So I was pleased that the State Department invited us to share our ideas about world federation with these folks. Each of these Asian nations has their own issues. In some cases, it's poverty. In one case, it's climate change, and in a couple of other cases, it's conflict within the country itself, ethnic strife and the like. Mm-hmm. We feel that we got to talk about what a difference it would make if we could change the United Nations so that it could be effective and get involved in these situations and help. Mm-hmm. For example, with poverty, with an effective United Nations where we could end wars, outlaw wars, there'd be all these resources of money and people to help these poor countries get on their feet. Mm-hmm. That would be an example of how a world federation could help these countries in Asia.
And would you say you were surprised when they seemed very open-minded to the idea of world federalism? I was surprised, and that they seemed to be intrigued about the idea, and they wanted to know, how could we actually make this possible? Is this a possibility? Which really pushed us far, because it seems like this is something that people are ready for right now.
Well, it surprised me in that my stereotype of Asian countries, these young leaders were much more on top of things than I expected. I thought they'd be kind of behind, but they weren't. Mm-hmm. So that part really pleased me. I think that they will, what we need from them is to convince their nations to get on board at the UN General Assembly, to talk their nations into supporting a review of the Charter, because the UN Charter is why the UN can't do its full job. Mm-hmm. So, and I think that some of those people that heard us talk will remember what we had to say.
We dove a little bit deeper by talking with the Vice President of the Democratic World Federalists, Fritz Pointer. He focused mostly on issues regarding human rights abuses and also the hypocrisy of larger nations like the United States, Russia, and China.
Foreign and domestic policy are intricately, inextricably, symbiotically interconnected. Mm-hmm. That it's not too much to see that how people of color in particular are treated in America mm-hmm. might be a clear reflection of how they're treated in the world. Mm-hmm. And that was part of what I was trying to get at in terms of my comments. that we must look both at domestic policy and foreign policy through a similar lens. That was what I was trying to get at. Yes, and also, getting at the fact that we are certainly aware that the American government, its stability, if you want to look at it that way, its continuity has a lot to do with its location. The fact that it's not close to dangerous enemies, that is surrounded by two huge oceans, Atlantic and Pacific, and thereby, are not subjected to the kind of constant, daily, almost hourly barrage of intrigue, of danger that would come if they were closer to dangerous enemies, if they were located somewhere. So it's a matter of, as they say in real estate, location, location, location. And to me, this opens the door for at least a dialogue about the possibility of world federal government. The fact that we don't have some sort of paragon here, some sort of, as you say, pure democratic system that is beyond alteration or beyond modification. And so we need to explore at least the thought and the possibility of a government, a world federalist government that can certainly make some sovereign governments accountable, and recognizing that some of these so-called sovereign governments must give up some of their sovereignty to be a part of a more democratic whole system, and that's what we're getting at. And so it seems to me that you're talking about hypocrisy. Yes. You're talking about saying one thing and doing another, and that seems to be what a lot of what we're up against in this country. And why, again, we think that literacy, particularly media literacy, is such an imperative, pursuit for Americans. That's why we have the whole quote-unquote Russiagate nonsense with the thing of the Russians are interfering with our elections, because many Americans are not doing the kind of critical thinking and reading and analysis that they should do in order to make a democracy, or make this democracy or any democracy function. It takes an educated people, it takes an educated and aware people to at least an engaged population to make a democracy work.
After that meeting, how do you feel going forward? Do you feel it was a great meeting and it really inspired you? Or do you think, man, we have a lot of work to go?
I was inspired. I was absolutely shocked and pleased that we were invited by the United States, by the State Department, to participate, and to see recently that our Vice President, or the Vice President, Pence, has now gone to meet with the senior members of this same organization. And we were talking to junior members, if you will, new young leadership from this organization. And we're hoping that some of our ideas penetrated, and I think they did, that they could take back and make a case for a more democratic world and a more democratic world government. So I hope that I was absolutely enthusiastic and just juiced, if you will, pardon the expression, about the whole thing myself. I was impressed with the intelligence of those young people, with their awareness, with what they were concerned about. It was just absolutely, I was just so pleased. Just so pleased, yes.
This week on DWF News.
It's clear right now that something needs to change. We need more involvement from other leaders around the world to work together in ways we've never done before. Climate change cannot be solved by one nation. Neither can nuclear weapons, nor can the problems we have with multinational corporations abusing people's sovereignty, countries' sovereignty, and abusing actual individual liberty. This is the mission of San Francisco Promise. This is the mission of the Democratic World Federalists organization. To make the world more peaceful through multilateralism, and also through creating frameworks in geopolitical systems where everyone is held accountable and everyone is given the right to stand up for what they believe in and have individual liberty. Okay, let's finish up this week with a poem from one of our board members, Bob Neumann. This poem is all about peace warriors. The idea that he came up with, where the elderly would go out there and fight for peace instead of losing the lives of young people. He hopes in this effort that people will come together and basically put down arms and instead come together and hold each other in arms and hugs. Check it out. Let us know what you think.
Okay, this one is called Boil Down and Down. Neumann's basic argument. There can be no world peace without worldwide justice. No universal world justice without enforceable world laws. And no usable world laws without a world government. Create and make it work. All of this has got to be based on the vote in goodwill of the world's people and, yes, nature. Nature's rules are simple and brutal, as are nuclear and future superweapons of war. So we must now use nonviolence and our emotionally laced intellect to rise above our base instincts and handle warming, earth deep pollution, and the common global warming. Old drafted peace warriors should be our first line of defense and change. We can make a revolution to create a world government peacefully and democratically and grow into our more noble ideals before the next man-made holocaust or worldwide war. Thank you.
The DWF News always loves to share art and writings because we believe world peace can't only be secured through politics, but it can also be secured through arts and culture. This is really important because it gives you a different perspectives on the world issues. Rather than always fighting and arguing, it gives you a chance to sit back and look and perceive things through someone else's eyes. This is where we try to combine politics with art. The DWF News Network will always be here to educate you when it comes to foreign affairs and world news. We hope that you'll be sticking with us as we go in deeper into more issues regarding some of the biggest questions that we have out there. Will we go into another world war? Will nuclear weapons be used? Will we meet the challenge of climate change? And will we come together to create a new global economy that works for all people? I hope you enjoyed what we talked about here, and we'll be seeing you next time. Goodbye.